Okay, so we'll pick up with this section where we left off and wrap up this lecture. I have just finished talking about race and the Great Migration, Plessy versus Ferguson, and W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. I'd mentioned earlier a new concept called social Darwinism, and you can see up here that I've got links for these if you want to read more about them, and these are also identifications. But social Darwinism will emerge from Charles Darwin, but it puts a little bit more of a sociological spin on it. And it's the survival of the fittest, but some other splinter ideas come out of this, and splinter movements, rather. One of those is called eugenics. Eugenics is this quote-unquote science of race. And this is a very strange pseudoscience that emerges in this period, and it's used in many ways to try to show superiority and inferiority in race. The idea behind it is that they would measure things like the size of someone's head, or the density of their muscles, or look at their lifespan and try to determine, based on that, which races were better than others. So again, you can see how this would be used in negative ways. Birth control is also a really interesting thing that comes about within social Darwinism. You think about birth control today as a way to control pregnancies and the size of families, but the original idea of birth control was actually social. It was intended originally to help control the number of children that people were having, and the social class with the greatest birth rate, the highest birth rate, were the lower, poorer classes. And so it was in some ways intended to control class and to control the number of poor having too many children. And it kind of went into this idea of the undeserving poor. You have some works that come out, some literature that comes out to support these different movements. One was by a man named William Graham Sumner, who wrote the book What Social Classes Owe to Each Other. And this is, again, going to lead to the reinforcement of the Protestant work ethic that I mentioned that dates back to the Puritans. And another idea called muscular Christianity, linking this Protestant work ethic and being, a good Christian and hardworking, and that equaling success. A good example of how you can see muscular Christianity and social Darwinism in American society is to think about organizations that emerged during this period, such as the Salvation Army or the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. Both of these institute the idea that if you are strong and fit and work hard, that all of these characteristics lead to success. So those are just some ideas to remember. Also, as we're leaving the Gilded Age and starting to get into the progressive movement, something to keep in mind, that the progressive movement is going to be inspired in part because there are no public relief programs. There is no welfare. There is no child and family services. There are only private charities and hospitals and churches. And so as the number of poor just explode during this period, society realizes that there is not enough benevolence and charities, benevolent societies and charities to help meet the needs of those who need it. And the progressive era will work to try to right some of those injustices. The social gospel movement is going to target the inequalities of wealth and power and claim that corruption is really based on the democratic process and greed. And coming out of this, you're going to have a new generation of middle-class reformers. These are our early progressives. These middle-class reformers are mostly white, mostly middle and upper class, and they are a new generation. They are the children and the sons and daughters of post-Civil War, a post-Civil War society. With the increase of colleges and universities that began during this period, you have a much larger number of college graduates, and a lot of college graduates are then using their education to go back into society and try to do good. So this is going to begin what will be called the settlement movement and this is still private organizations, but it's a little bit more into what we would think today of the nonprofit field. The best example of this is Jane Addams in the Hull House in Chicago. She begins the Hull House as a settlement house that is mostly filled with immigrants and the working poor. And not only do they have a place where they can board there, but also she provides education classes, nutrition classes, and sanitation and laundry classes, and trying to help educate the poor in how to live a better life. Another person involved in this early progressive movement is Henry George and also Edward Bellamy, who write two different books, Progress and Poverty and Looking Backward. Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward is a futuristic utopian novel, and it embraces cooperation and says we should reject class strife, inequality, and competition. So you have some fairly extreme views where some people like Edward Bellamy or Henry George, they want to swing the pendulum completely the other direction, and it's really almost an anti-class view or a socialist view. So speaking of collectivism and righting in a classless society and righting wrongs that have been formed by labor, we have the emergence of labor unions and several important court cases that deal with the labor question. You can see that there are links to all of these cases, and these are also identifications, but we have Munn versus Illinois and Wabash versus Illinois that specifically deal with the railroads. And then we have U.S. versus E.C. Knight Company and Lochner versus New York. I'm just going to highlight one of these right now. Lochner versus New York is a case that is a blow to the labor movement and to the early progressive movement. This is a book review for a book by Paul Kens that came out a few years ago. And it's Lochner versus New York was a case in 1905. The Supreme Court was very conservative at this point, very pro-business. Now remember, they'd also had a lot of Republican presidents. The presidents are the ones who appoint the judges, and the Republican Party had begun to become fairly cozy with big business. And in this case, if you look down here, the Supreme Court's decision declared unconstitutional a New York state law that had limited bakery workers to no more than 10 hours per day or 60 hours per week. In other words, the state of New York had limited the number of hours that these bakers could work because they said that more than that was exploitation of the worker. So it was seen as a victory within the world of labor and labor unions. But in a 5-4 opinion, the Supreme Court struck down this state law and said that the state law violated here, and it's saying they violated the due process and the right of contract between employers and employees, and cited the 14th Amendment. So it came down on the side of competition and said the state cannot evoke its police power and limit the number of hours, that if Baker wants to work more than that number of hours, that they can. So this was a little bit of a blow in terms of the labor movement. Okay, and finally, we've already talked a little bit about the labor movement, but I just wanted to remind you of 1886 being a big breakout year for the formation of labor unions. One of the largest labor unions were the Knights of Labor, and they really were pushing for an 8-hour day. As you remember from earlier, this is all going to culminate in what's known as the Haymarket Affair or the Haymarket Square Riot, and it ends in bloodshed, and you have the killing of strikers by police, and then you have an explosion go off that's blamed on the labor union and the workers, and so you end up having arrests and trials and convictions of quote-unquote anarchists who were part of this labor movement. Two of the most famous victims were Albert and Lucy Parsons. And so this is a big blow to the Knights of Labor movement because they come out of this looking like extremists. And so people began to view labor unions as being extreme also. Another labor union not seen as extremely was Samuel Gompers and the American Federation of Labor. This labor union still exists today. And then finally, another fairly radical labor union was a group that emerged for unskilled workers. The other two were both for skilled workers. And this group for unskilled workers was called the International Workers of the World, and they were nicknamed the Wobblies for short. So the biggest one that's going to stick in terms of labor unions is going to be the American Federation of Labor, which is today the AFL-CIO. So, all right, there you have it.